Hey everybody, it's Dan. Welcome back. This is going to be a review of the Wargames Atlantic Classic Fantasy Villagers set that was newly released. This video is also sponsored by Wargames Atlantic because they were kind enough to send this our way to take a look at together. This set was released simultaneously with their guards just last week, actually, and we took a look at the guards. If you're watching these videos in close to real time anyway, just yesterday is when I put that video out. So I'm trying to put this one out as quickly as possible, right on its heels, because these sets really are designed to work in conjunction with one another. And if you haven't seen the guards review, I do recommend you give that one at least a cursory watch, just because I'm sure I'm going to be making some references to that kit throughout this review. And as with that video, we took a look at how the guards kit bashed with the Wargames Atlantic Foot Sergeants, which we reviewed last month. And in this case, people were curious about how this set would kit bash with the Peasant Levy that we reviewed back in January. And that's going to be even more important in this particular case because you can see from the box art, and the name certainly implies, that this set is not designed to make combatants. These are all just townsfolk. There's really, from looking at the sprues, I think only like 3 bits that can be construed as weapons. So if you are trying to have some fighters in the midst here, the ability to kit bash between those sets, I think, is going to be even more important. So we'll take a look at all of that together in just a little bit. So if you're not familiar with my videos, if you're new to the channel, welcome. Just so you're aware of the general flow, we'll take a look at the box very quickly. But we'll take a look at the sprues in depth, look at all the bits, give you a breakdown on numbers of bits. We'll put some of the figures together. Again, we'll do some kit bashing in this case. We'll do some scale comparisons with different manufacturers, and then I'll give you my final thoughts. So that's where we're headed. I will say at the beginning of this video, as I do with all my Wargames Atlantic videos, that you need to pay attention to model count with Wargames Atlantic because all their kits are a little bit different. Again, they are like seeming to trend toward these 24 model count kits these days, all for the same price point. But sometimes it's 30, sometimes it's 40. It just really depends on the kit, and none of the boxes come with bases, just something else to be aware of. Again, I do recommend you watch that guards video. I'm not going to go over the box in detail again because I made all the same commentary in that one, but that I much prefer the box art and layout that they were doing for their Age of Chivalry sets versus the classic fantasy range. I just want to see the figures Photoshop without any background. I know backgrounds are like atmospheric, but it makes it a little bit harder to see the figures that come in. One other thing that's of note in terms of the artwork here that stood out to me anyway is that this kit, from like an aesthetic standpoint, again, we're going for kind of like generic medieval fantasy is what I would say is sort of their point of view with both of these sets, really. Something kind of like what you would see in like the Witcher series. But what's interesting, and again, we'll take a look on the sprues, is that while that is true of like the bodies, there are also accessory bits in here to make, like in some cases, like some steampunk stuff, but like the art over here in both cases more reminds me of like Victorian England, sort of 19th century. Like that looks like Daniel Day-Lewis's character in Gangs of New York. I'm pretty sure that was a character in Sweeney Todd. So anyway, it's just interesting the way they've designed this kit. It is like high fantasy, medieval inspired, but there's bits in here to do some other stuff too. So as with the guards set, again, I've already taken the sprues out. There's 4 sprues, 24 models, 6 models per sprue, just like we saw with the guards. Again, no bases, just so we're abundantly clear on that. But you can source bases either through Wargames Atlantic directly or from some third-party sites, even just like eBay, for example. Now, the sprue layout, again, if you watch that guards review, it will be very familiar to you in that we have bodies in the center. There's accessories and arms flanking the bodies, and you've got heads on either side of the sprue, on either side here. So we'll do a quick overview shot here, and then we'll go into some of these bits in detail. Sometimes it's hard to figure out what's the front and the back of these sprues, which obviously doesn't matter if you're putting these together. It just makes it a little bit trickier for review purposes because I feel like I'm flipping sprues back and forth. But it does allow Wargames Atlantic to just cram a crazy number of bits onto these sprues. Now, I mentioned, and you can probably see right away, there's just a crazy number of accessory bits on this sprue. And a big part of the reason for that, I think, is because there really aren't weapons in this set. Again, these are designed to make like townsfolk, civilians, and weapons, of course, take up a lot of space on Sprue. So they had a lot of space left over for some of these accessories that we'll take a look at more toward the end of this opening segment of the review. But I just thought that was interesting. It's just a really impressive number of what I would call like dungeon dressing type bits, things that could be glued onto figures or onto bases, make objective markers, things like that. Anyway, let's look at these bodies. So straight away, what's interesting, first of all, they're all single piece instead of some Wargames Atlantic sets come with the torsos and the legs detached. These are all together. But you'll notice that there are 3 female and 3 male bodies in this set. And just, again, for the sake of completeness here, just flip it over so you can see, again, there's 3 male and then these 3 female. Again, I would say the aesthetic is like generic medieval, but there are some accessory bits here that could kind of change that aesthetic depending on what you're trying to do. So let's focus over here for just a second. So you can see 2 female bodies with some dresses. And I think they've really done a good job at towing a line in terms of, we talked like about historical influence in the last video, but with these in particular, making it to where it's really hard to pin down exactly what year they're trying to represent, because they're not trying to, right? So yeah, really beautiful sculpting, great crisp details on them. It's actually hard for me to focus on any one figure in particular here. Kind of like a peasant-looking garb on this one. Like maybe like a blacksmith or a laborer here. Let me flip this over so you can see. Yeah, so good mix of clothing design. And then also of note, I had mentioned some accessories that could be used to kind of change the time period. So they have this apron here, which was alluded to on the front cover art to make like a butcher. And then there are 2 cowls here that could go over. And I'm going to dry fit all of these to get an idea of what bodies these accessories are meant to go with, because I'm sure there are specific ones, but I'll report back on that at the build stage. And then there's also this, what looks like a skirt apron to go on the front of maybe one of these dresses, like this one or this one. So I'll find out. Anyway, really, I think they did a great job here. It's tricky sometimes too, this was mentioned in the comments of the guards one, where you have to make a decision with design about whether you want to have a more focused niche point of view when it comes to fantasy design, or if you want to go with a sort of broader approach, at the risk sometimes of not really appealing to anybody. But I think they've done a really good job here of making it like just generic enough that it could be used for like a wide variety of settings and systems, without making it completely unapproachable and kind of useless to everybody. So anywho, so again, heads are going to be on either side of the sprue. Now it's interesting, there are 30 heads, which is even more than we saw in the guards kit. And that, I think, is the highest ratio of heads to bodies we've seen in, I think, any kit we've reviewed together. That's a 5-to-1 ratio of heads to bodies, which is super, super impressive. And what I'll do here, I really struggled to categorize these, unlike with the guards, because it just covers a pretty wide gambit. I will say there are 13 female and 17 male, or at least I should say carefully here that 13 what I believe Wargames Atlantic intended to be female, and 17 male. So we'll just kind of work our way around the sprue here without worrying about trying to categorize anything. And I will, I'll say once again, talking about just sheer variety, that I'm really impressed with what Wargames Atlantic has accomplished here. There's even like some elven ears on some of these. And as I said, it always runs the risk of like trying to do too much, like we've seen in some other kits. But I think that they've done a really good job here of just making it as useful a set as possible by including as many options as they possibly could. Let me flip this one more time here. And you can see even some like exotic options we saw down at the bottom, like some more modern looking hats, Middle Eastern garb, some Renaissance attire. Again, just by adding different accessories, it allows you to transform some of these bodies into different time periods, which is pretty cool. So again, heads, 30 total heads per sprue. So, and remember, anytime I'm talking about number of bits, it's per sprue, so you have to multiply it by 4 in this case to figure out what you've got in the set at large. Arms were also difficult to categorize, again, because there's no weapons, and in fact, there are only, I mentioned 3 that I think can be construed as weapons. We'll talk about all hands here in just a second, but there's this one, which is like a club with a nail in it. There's an axe, which is, I really think, like a woodcutter's axe, and then a pickaxe down here. There's also a dagger down here, so I guess there's 4. And I guess in theory, anything could be a weapon, like staves, and there's like a rock down here. But I think those are really the only things that could really reasonably be considered a weapon in a miniature war game. But beyond that, there are 13 left and 15 right arms. And of those, 16 of them are empty, and the remainder are holding something. So one other thing to note, this kind of got briefly mentioned in the guards set, that anytime you've got like multi-sets like this, where you have just a bunch of arms that are meant to be like theoretically interchangeable, you have to make a decision about whether you want all the arms to match. And what they did with the guards set was gave everybody gloves, which I noticed in the comments that not everybody was a fan of. This is also something that we saw in the North Star review of their Wizards 2 set. What they did in that case was they added bracers to all the forearms. I bring all this up because they've done something similar here, which you can see in this case is that everybody has the same like sort of short sleeve design. So all of these arms are the same arm, essentially, whether it's male or female, whether it's holding an item or if it's an open hand, doesn't really matter. Everything is just this kind of half sleeve. I like it. I know that, again, it's a divisive issue, whether in multi-sets like this, you should do that, or if you should have some with like some bracers on, some not, some gloves, some not. The problem if you do that is that it automatically makes certain arm combinations kind of the default, whereas if you have them all be the same style of sleeve, it allows all of these to be completely interchangeable with one another, which is what I would want in a multi-set like this, since that's sort of the whole point. Again, really no categorizing here. I'm just sort of moving around the sprue as I'm talking, but you can see a good mix of hands in various poses, open hands, and we'll look at the accessories in just a moment, but you'll notice that some of these accessories are definitely designed to be placed in the hands, which all of these open hands in various poses, if you will be useful for. Some down here, some weird stuff too, like this puppet hand, fan. So yeah, really cool mix of stuff. And I think, again, going back to this covering just a really wide variety of kind of topics and content, a lot of subject matter that isn't covered by really any other kit that I'm aware of, and I'm aware of most multi-part plastic sets out there. So it's just cool to see some things that you just haven't seen before. I think that was a clever approach. Let's talk about these accessories, because there's just a ton of them. There's 30 items across the sprue that I would refer to as accessories or dungeon dressing. It's really, I'll call this open-ended design, where some of it's obviously meant to like go in conjunction with other stuff, but for the most part, it was almost just like they came up with a list of maybe 100 random items and then just narrowed it down to these 30 that they wanted. And you can use them for whatever you want, right? You can make objective markers out of it. You can glue it onto the figures. I'll just kind of move around the sprue again, because again, there's really no categories here. So yeah, you can see little things like snake, butcher's knife, knife in a sheath up here, a pipe with some smoke coming out of it, one-handed sickle, some bottles, satchels, pouches, even like a necklace here. I'm wondering if that will go over a neck easily enough. Anyway, back to like open-ended design. You can use this for whatever you want. And like in my own case, I'm thinking about using some of this stuff to make a like pay cart or an accessory cart, just loaded up with wares, blending some of this stuff, some of the accessory bits that we saw in the guards set, etc. A little mask down here. Anyway, there's lots to see, there's lots to do, and it's funny because like at every turn on this sprue, I find myself coming up with like a new idea about what I want to use this kit for, which is, I think, the whole point of a kit like this. So really impressive as it sits on the sprue, no different from what we saw with the guards. Now, though, let's cut some of these off the sprue. Let's take a look at how they go together. As I mentioned, I want to kit bash with the Peasant Levy set specifically, and then we'll do some scale comparisons across different manufacturers. Right, so a couple of quick housekeeping notes. So I had mentioned that there are these accessory bits, so these two cowls, apron here, and then this larger apron. I did find that they're specific to certain bodies, by which I mean that this larger cowl only fits on this male body. This smaller one goes on this male body, kind of the blacksmith looking guy. This apron goes on that same body, and then this skirt can go, or that apron, I should say, like kind of skirt apron, can go on either of these two female bodies out on the side. So that's just from dry fitting. I found those are the only combinations that really made any sense. Also, if you're cutting that apron off, the longer one, just beware, because I found this bit here kind of fiddly. I had to be super careful when I was cutting it out, but that is probably evident just from looking at it. I also wanted to make a note, having now assembled it, it's always good to put figures together. It gives you a much better insight into like utility. But what I found really is that there were probably 12 heads going around the sprue, and I can like point out some of them too. Like there's an elf head here. There's these two more time period specific hats, a couple of ones with goggles, right? So there are a handful of heads that I'm just never going to use because I'm building these up more with like generic medieval fantasy in mind. So it's really neat that they included those options, but it does help to explain why there's so many heads in this set, because I think for a lot of people, many of the heads are just totally redundant. So that's just something to be aware of. As I was putting the kit together, I found more and more that I was less overwhelmed by the number of heads, simply because a lot of them I wasn't using at all. But what I've done for us here is I've put a bunch of these together. So let me start with 3 figures that I've built straight out of the Villagers set. So this is the one kind of blacksmith body that I've put together. I did put the cowl on this one. And yeah, I think that they create really atmospheric figures. Again, if you're building these for role-playing games, for any kind of skirmish war game that just needs kind of NPCs, if you're making a diorama, I think that there's a lot of character in these figures. So really cool. So these 3 were made just from bits from this set. Now, what I've done with the next 3 is I've assembled them with arms from the Wargames Atlantic Peasant Levy. So the body here is from the Villagers set. Both of the arms in this case are from the Peasant Levy set. The head is actually from the Guards set as well. So there's another body. In this case, the head and the arms are both from the Peasant Levy, but the body is from this Villagers set. And I had no issues putting these together. I will make the same note on the head that I made on the Guards set, which is that the neck connection point is like a couple millimeters different on this one versus the Age of Chivalry set, which creates the effect, I think anyway, I noticed it, that the head sits a little bit lower than I would want it to. So I think you're usually better off keeping the heads from the Villagers set and just swapping the arms out. But I think the arms work totally fine. The only times where maybe there's a proportion issue is on the female bodies, because all of the bodies and arms on the Peasant Levy set are male bodies and arms. So once again, this is a body and head from the Villagers. The arms are both from the Peasant Levy. And then the reverse is also true. So these are bodies from the Peasant Levy using arms and a head from the Villagers set, which made a cool kind of thief. And the same thing here. So the body is Wargames Atlantic Peasant Levy, and the arms and the head are from the Villagers set. I think my general assessment is that the Villagers set benefits from the Peasant Levy more than the Peasant Levy benefits from the Villagers set, if that makes sense, in terms of like the bits. But I really did find most of the bits to be totally interchangeable. I also did some fun stuff here. So I took two of the figures I'd done from the guard set, and this is a head and pair of arms from the villagers set. And I'd mentioned that, again, all of the figures in this villagers set are really designed to make non-combatants. And so you can actually use some of the bits from this set to make the guards look kind of more at ease, if you will. So that's made kind of a merchant here. Same thing here. This is a body from the guard set. The sword scabbard is actually from the foot sergeants, but the arms and the head are both from this villagers set. So again, going back to either role-playing games or just making a diorama, I think there's a lot of versatility between these kits if you're willing to blend some of the bits together and make kind of like an off-duty soldier there. And then this is the reverse of that. So this is a body from the villagers set. Head and arms are from the guards to make a, I don't know, guard that just got woken up or something. But let me get reorganized here. I want to show you some scale comparisons with other manufacturers, and then I'll share my final thoughts on the kit. So I've been slowly trying to up my scale comparison game for the last 6 months or so by collecting various miniatures from different manufacturers. And this is what I've kind of settled on, which is the figures on 25mm rounds are kind of standard figures from a variety of manufacturers. And then of course the gray plastic ones are the villagers miniatures that we just took a look at. So just so I'm going to call them out, we'll move slowly around the turntable here, and I will tell you what the model is from what manufacturer, but just so you're expecting it, every fourth figure is going to be from this villagers set. So that's where we're going to start in the center here with a villager model. This is Games Workshop 4th edition, Citadel Talisman from the 80s, Games Workshop Lord of the Rings, Villager, Wargames Atlantic Foot Sergeant, Perry Miniatures, Warlord Games, Villager, Gripping Beast, Victrix, Fireforge Games, Villager, Cool Mini or Not, Reaper, Privateer Press, their War Machine line, Villager, Oathmark, Frostgrave, Mantic, Villager, Games Workshop 7th edition, 6th edition, and 5th edition. So what's the final verdict? I think this is a cool and interesting set. I think that it's covering ground here that nobody else, as far as I'm aware, certainly not in multi-part plastic, has done in a way that is this thorough. And I think certainly if you are using this for like role-playing games, for dioramas, if you have any skirmish-based games where you need NPCs kind of wandering around the table, this is definitely going to be a kit that would be interesting for you. Now, I do think you'll get the most mileage out of this set if you have other sets, much like in the kit bashing examples we looked at. If you have other sets that you can both blend into this kit and for which you can blend this kit into, I think that's really where the kind of the utility of this set is really going to shine. But otherwise, I think it's another very strong entry from Wargames Atlantic into their fantasy range. Very cool to see. If you're enjoying these reviews, and if you were considering picking up anything from Wargames Atlantic based on them, I'd be very grateful if you'd consider using our affiliate link. Links in the description. Not only are you going to save 10% on your order, but a portion of those proceeds is going to come back to directly supporting this channel and fueling future reviews. From here, I actually have a couple more reviews on the docket already, and I have some more painting content that'll be coming out here shortly. But as ever, I really appreciate you dropping by for this one. And until next time, happy gaming.